welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we are going to cover Tyler Carpenter's Super Plumber Sisters. This is the first chapter that came out last week. Basically, if you had it on digital tier, or if you, backed the campaign and got digital download from the email. The books are being sent out now, from what I understand, so physical copies are going to be available fairly soon. This is obviously a Super Mario parody, but I'm not going to analyze it as a Super Mario parody. I'm going to analyze it as its own thing, as much as I can, obviously. And I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised as I was going through this little book. One of the great things about doing a Super Mario, parody or references to it, is that it is something that is in the general cultural zeitgeist. Mario has been a staple of pop culture since its introduction in 1985. And even though this was basically dropped as the Super Mario movie was in full swing, this is the kind of thing that you can keep producing and keep releasing, and there won't be any major issues because people will still be attached to Mario and use that as a reference for these characters. And it'll be an interesting story nonetheless. After having talked to Tyler really quick, this is basically his best campaign of all time at this point in time, obviously. 675 backers, that's a significant number. I mean, we've got a lot of people here who are struggling to get in the 100 to 200 range. 675 is really a good number. I'm not going to look at the money because that's really a thing I'm starting to try to move away from, because that's not the really important thing when we look at these projects. Really, the amount of backers is more important, and sometimes looking at the selection of the different options for the campaign itself. This one here, you had a large number of covers, you had a few odds and ends in terms of add-ons, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary or exceptional. I think it was a really well put up and really well set up campaign overall. I would say the main character in this issue, at least, is Lucia, which is the older of the two sisters, who also seems to be the more responsible of the two. She does have a tendency to have some anger management issues, which is a very typical thing in manga. She also seems to be the smarter of the two. She's able to guess monster weaknesses and such. And she has a bit of a crush on a guy called Alfredo, who is an extremely good-looking guy, so I kind of understand her in that regards. She also seems to be the more ranged attack specialized of the two sisters. The younger sister, I would say, is Mara, who is an happy-go-lucky, very energetic little sister. She likes to tease her sister quite a bit and get snacks, bake cookies, things along those lines, and appears to be the more melee combat-oriented character of the two. Overall, that's all we have as far as character go here in this particular story. There's a few minor things here and there, but you don't need more than that in this book. And you don't need that much more characterization for them either, because that's a perfectly okay setup. The story begins as our heroines are going on a house call for Mrs. Ono, who seems to have a problem with a glob monster, because that's what plumbers do in this universe, I guess. It's a bit like firemen in Fahrenheit 451. But as you can see, things are not going all that well. The creature has grown quite a bit from the original estimate and is quite unwilling to go back to the sewers where it used to live, because it's rather scared of being there. As Mara pulls out her weapon, the monster hits her outside of the building with his slime. It's slime, I should say. Don't want to misgender a horrible glob monster. But in response, Lucia starts sucking him up using a vacuum, which works rather well. The two sisters are done with their work. They go down and they get into a bit of an argument because Miss Ono had a coupon and Lucia wanted to actually get paid a decent amount this time around. Mara's more like, yeah, it helps us grow our business. So they have a bit of a scuffle there. After they get home, Lucia is going to get cleaned up. Mara makes a bunch of cookies. So it's a good time to relax while at home. Lucia asks if they've got any more plans for today, and Mara tells them that they have dinner plans with Alfredo, who is Lucia's crush. Lucia, of course, denies this in typical manga fashion. We get a quick explanation of just how much Lucia actually loves Alfredo, and Mara calls him to tell them that the reservations should be kept, but he tells her that there's a monster in his building and that he needs some help. The two of them jump into their white van and head to the scene as quickly as possible, with Lucia driving since she's the more aggressive of the two drivers half the time, according to their estimation, to get to the location. As they get there, they see a horde of monsters that are attacking the inhabitants, and one of them latches itself onto Mara. Lucia takes a bit of time to investigate and comes back with a pair of water pistols loaded with salt water, which is able to destroy the monsters who are demon-possessed amoebas. She frees Mara. Doesn't take very long. I mean, she only had one amoeba on her arm, while some of the citizens we saw had quite a few on them. The pair go around and destroy all the amoebas found in the apartment complex, saying that they will send the bill to probably the building owner for their work. When they get to Alfredo's room, they are met with the mothership, basically the boss amoeba, and it is quite large, as you can see. Lucia starts soaking it up with salt water, and Mara pulls out her electro wrench to smack it, but she notices that it's out of juice. So she has to find a plug-in for it. While the wrench is charging, Lucia gets knocked down by the monster, who gets ready to eat her brain, because that's what apparently amoebas do. The monster gets ready to eat her, and Lucia tells her sister, just tell Alfredo that she loved them. But the monster gets smacked straight in the noggin, and it splats all over the place. The duo then start thinking about where the monster came from and what is going on. And using the hints gathered from the first monster they fought that day, it leads them to a pipe at the back of the apartment building. A very suspicious-looking pipe, I would say. But before they get to investigate, their cousins, Winnie and Wanda, show up and start antagonizing them a little bit. And this is how this story ends. It's a pretty straightforward story. It has all the story beats that we need. It has a decent amount of humor. It works extremely well for what it is. I was not expecting a revolutionary or a profound story with emotional ramification, but I was pleasantly surprised about the whole thing and at how interesting the characters ended up being, which is the hardest thing to do when you're actually messing with this form of parody. There was a rather large variety of covers available with this particular campaign and for this particular book. This is the standard one, which comes in the digital edition. If you have the digital deluxe edition, you get all the covers at the end of the book, including the not safe for work one. But it is my opinion here that this is probably the better of the covers for that particular book. The other one we had in the first slide of this presentation is also rather good, but this one here has stronger visual elements. You've got both of our characters with a nice background, with the sewers at the back. You've got everything that you need to attract attention, give us a bit of an idea of the setting and of the situation itself. The positioning on the giant wrench is a little bit awkward, but let's face it, a giant wrench is a bit of an awkward weapon as well, but not one that we've never seen either in comic or in video games. But it is a thing that needs to be brought up. The branding itself for Super Plumber Sister is really good. It works, it's fun, it has the necessary fanciness to it to attract the attention once again. So this, in my opinion, is an extremely strong cover and probably one that would move units if the book was on a rack in a store somewhere. As I was saying, I got this as a digital copy just last week. I understand the paper copies are being shifted now, but this is actually a pretty heavy document. There might be different versions of the PDF floating around. because the easy creator sent 2 or 3 links originally, and I just grabbed them off the first link. Honestly, I would probably recommend going on Global Comics or another distribution platform for easy delivery in the future. Maybe not immediately as the campaign ends. Give it some time for your actual backers to read it and discuss it. But after a few months, putting your issues up on a site like this probably would not be a bad idea to generate a little revenue here and there and ease of distribution in the future if you use some of those catch-up packs. Honestly, probably be staying rather than having to send all the links all the time like I've seen with some digital campaigns. As I said, the Digital Deluxe Edition has the compilation of all the covers at the back. I mean, honestly, only the cover we have for this book and this one here are really interesting to me. The others are all various levels of okay to not even that good. Honestly, not impressed with the not safe for work one either. It's really a case of your mileage may vary. We get an ad for Draw and Talk in all of his different books. We've got The Girl with the Mega Fist. We've got the one with the witch. I can't remember the title. That's the one I didn't back and I don't have in my list. Might order it next time he has a Kickstarter running around. Gives us the details on how to reach the creator and the rating for the book. I would say that this book here is, he says T for teen. Monster humor, mild action, and violence. Yes, but it's more or less an all ages book. The last page is you're coming into January 2024 for chapter 2. That would be probably when the campaign drops. Perfectly reasonable and hopefully doesn't have any issues either financing or moving the campaign through. The character art in this particular book is actually quite beautiful. Not just sexy to be sexy. It actually looks really nice. Very nice to have modern Japanese style being used here and no real American or European influence, even though it's an American manga. A little bit different than what you see in many other books in the same category, I would say. Costumes are pretty good, but he could use a little extra to make them a little bit less. Modern manga is not known to have very complex costumes and things like that either, because in the end, the idea is to have books and product shipped and produced as quickly as possible in a way. This is a thing that you had more in the 80s and 90s before digital tools were really used, which is even more jarring if you start thinking about it. But just little things could have improved those costumes by not a huge margin, just a small margin to make them a little bit less flat. Put the first letter of the name of the character on the front of the overalls, maybe. That would have been a nice touch. In original Mario had the M on the at, really. So this wouldn't be a weird thing to put on there. And it would make the costumes look a little flat, like I said. The monsters in this are actually pretty great as well, and the concept of a slime monster is perfectly fine in this type of story and with the teams we're playing with. The first one being sentient is nice as well, while the second one is clearly just a brainless monster. So we have a variety of things and a variety of monsters. So it's pretty nice overall. We have a few scenes where the characters are super deformed, and they're actually integrated pretty well in the story, and it's not overused, which is a thing that we see in a lot of manga clones out there. It causes some issues, especially if you're playing with some of the thematics and some of the aesthetics of the style. Here, it's integrated perfectly well, as I said. Giant wrenches are really nice as a weapon. Same with the super soakers. They're really funny as a weapon as well. The only issue I have here is how they're holding their weapons with the super soakers. I know they're super soakers and not actual rifles or pistols, but it just looks a little bit weird to me just because of how much firearms I've seen in comics over the years. And I mean, maybe we should use or draw trigger discipline even on super soaker, because that's another thing that would get some people just a tad bit stressed when they see it. The backgrounds are generally great. Same with the buildings. The buildings are actually really cool. I mean, we've got details on them. We've got what we need. The threes here actually work as well, pretty good. But it also has a lot of things that you would see in the typical, well, manga in general. Modern mangas are actually fairly common with this as well, with blank and gradient backgrounds. The thing we actually see in American comics more and more now as well. I do believe it's a bit of an issue, but that's a industry-wide issue and not a specific problem with this book, because when, like I said, when we do have backgrounds, they are perfectly functional. Here we see here the gradient backgrounds, things like that. This is fairly common in manga in general. Just remember that. Really, the biggest issue with the art is the actual white man van. It seems too roomy. It's very floaty on the panels. When it's next to the heroine's house, there should have been an actual driveway or parked in the street. There's issues with it, and it does really attract the attention when you look at it. Good mechanical design is always difficult, especially with someone who, like me, who keeps looking for it for some reason. But it is something that it's not awful. It's just the way it's set up is kind of puzzling with this story. There's that one panel where Mara is trying to look for a plug-in for electro wrench, but here it really more looks like she's looking for a signal on her cell phone. Because if you were looking for a plug-in, you wouldn't be holding the plug up. You would be holding the plug down as you're looking for a plug-in at ground level. I know I'm probably being very picky here, but those are just things that came up. The scaling in the final fight is also really weird. It feels like the Alfredo's apartment must be something like 50 feet wide and 10 feet tall or 20 feet tall. But that's also just a very manga thing. It works fine. And I really like the effect of the electro wrench hitting the monster. That actually looks really, really good. Once we start looking at the story, the first thing we have to say here is that this is actually a manga. It's not a manga clone. It's not a fake manga made by an American or European, something along those lines, which we've seen quite a few past. It has the necessary story beats, it has necessary element. The art is made to fit the needs. So it's a much better book than many of those manga clones out there. Here we've got Kyle Travel. I didn't do a full review on it, but I did talk about it really quickly, which didn't work as far as a manga clone goes. We also dealt with SPQR Bizarre Adventure, which was a full-on parody. And it's a bit in the same style here that we had before, because here SPQR Bizarre Adventure really did a full-on manga rather than going on and trying to pretend it was something else. That's how you should be doing manga in North America and Europe and everywhere else. Don't try to use your local influences and just dig into what actually works. A little bit like Niobe, which we reviewed last week, this is another book which is fairly sexy, but there's nothing here that is beyond what you would normally see in your average all-ages shonen manga, outside of that not safe for work cover. Both in the dialogue and in the art. We're also not playing with really fancy character writing here. We have got the tsundere girl with a bit of an anger issue. We've got the Genki girl. We've got a himbo, even though we don't see Alfredo all that much. And if things follow the standard Super Mario trends, Alfredo's probably going to be fairly competent, as it would fit with him being the Princess Peach / Daisy. We've got plenty of jokes in there. They hit the right tone, which is very important. They hit correctly, and they elicit the necessary amount of chuckles. This is actually pretty hard to do, especially when you're dealing with a parody, because sometimes you try too hard when you do a parody, and a lot of stuff ends up lost in, I was going to say lost in translation, but that's kind of how it is. It just ends up lost. You can look at some parody movies, and you can compare like early Mel Brooks movies to recent parodies like Scary Movie and things like that, and it'll tell you a little bit here what works and what doesn't when you're dealing with parody. We get a very nice payoff with the first monster not saying that he wants to stay in the sewer, and the evil amoeba, and them finding the giant pipe at the end. This is the kind of payoff that you don't always end up having in comics. So this is good to have in one really nicely, tightly packed issue. Our main characters don't appear to be as wealthy as you would expect some plumbers to be nowadays. And they're trying to grow their business, even going as far as giving coupons for monster extermination. Do seem to have a very good rivalry as well with their cousins, Wanda and Winnie, which appear to be in the same business. That's all very nice. It actually gives enough depth to the character, and the characters not being overly wealthy, powerful, etc. is a very good trait that we have in many manga out there, especially when dealing with the bounty hunter type of manga story, which you can see in Cowboy Bebop. That's probably the most popular or commonly seen one in North America. But I mean, that's a trope or a setup that is used in an extremely large number of books. The brain-eating amoebas are pretty cool as a villain, and the look is very Metroid-inspired, probably where this came from. Killing them with salt water and not holy water is a very nice joke, okay? It works for what it is, and it makes the book not overly violent or gritty. It makes it perfectly functional as a comedy book. One thing I do have a few issues with, though, is the random semi-swears that we get in this. And that's a problem that I actually have with a lot of manga translations as well. Japanese is a very odd duck language. There's very few expletives, and the use of them is usually very rigorously controlled. So whenever I see it in a manga, I find swearing to be weird because as you study Japanese a bit in Japanese culture, you see that it's a little bit off-brand for the language. Here, since it's an American book, it's not as jarring, let's say, but it's something that I don't enjoy in something that has that very manga feel, and that's one thing that just feels odd. When we look at the pacing for this book, we are looking at a very basic action, character introduction, action kind of format. This is textbook pacing for actually an American comic, or when you're dealing with a pitch for a manga. You should have seen some of them. If you've bought Tankobon in the past, you probably would have seen a few of those pitches in some at the end of some volumes. Basically, what the artist and the author sent the publisher as their basic script and basic idea of what was going to happen. I remember that for Samurai Deeper Kyo. I remember that for Naruto. I didn't see it. One Piece, we have the basic outline for it. We see it in a few different books. I can't remember off the top of my head that many recently. But if we look at it here, though, it's an unusual format for a manga introductory chapter. Because in those, you generally have character introduction followed by action. I've just read chapter 1 of Dan Da Dan. It was packed in with a book that I bought, and it's precisely that format. I also read, I don't know what the translation is in English, but Princesse Puncheuse, and it's the exact same format. We've got our character introduction, and the end of the chapter is our large action scene. This is a thing that some of those people doing manga-style books need to start investigating every once in a while. The standard format action, character introduction, action works really well for something that is going to be very short term or very small. If you want to have something that's going to be ongoing, character introduction followed by action is more reliable. If you look at ISOM as an example in the indie comic sphere, ISOM follows that format a lot more than action, character introduction, action. That's what might have brought some people to get mad at Young Rippa for doing a book that is not following the standard formulation. We do get a monster explanation in this, but it's just short enough to give us what we need about the monster amoebas, and it allows us to move the story forward and gives us an understanding that the sisters actually know what they're doing. And this is something that is very manga-like, and it's not overstaying its welcome either, like we have in other manga where it becomes way too long. So this bit is really well done. Honestly, this is as fun as it needs to be to keep our attention. The art is sexy, the jokes are funny, and they land. We got enough action and drama to keep us interested. Everything in there is perfectly fit for consumption, let's say. One of the biggest problems you could have with this is that since there's going to be months between releases of issues, readers will be required to come back to the book to try to generate hype for the next chapter, which is not always easy. It's also very hard to finance an entire series off of one Kickstarter, so there's balance to be had there. This would honestly be the type of manga that you would see in magazines like Shonen Jump and such to try to help a new artist grow and develop. Probably not something that would be long running, but something that would be running a couple of issues. Then the artist would be able to pitch something else, and that would be picked up. Is this a book I would recommend? Yeah, if you want a manga with all the trappings, with an author with a proven track record of both his production and deliveries, this is wonderful. Would this be published in Japan? More than likely not. Nintendo would come down on this with a massive hammer to try to protect their IP, even though this is all ages. Parody is always a weird thing to deal with, honestly, but I'm quite happy with this book. So I hope you guys had fun listening to me over this book. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing and analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.